Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm Nathan and today I'm reviewing this very unique Audi A4 Allroad, which is not your regular Avant. If you go back in time to the late 90s, early 2000s, the automotive world was a very different place, especially at Audi, because Audi decided that, in order to win over consumers from BMW and Mercedes, they really got to step up their game, especially as crossovers and SUVs were taking off. In order to do that, they decided to take a different approach and create the A6 Allroad, which was the C5 platform. Now, the C5 platform, although very unique, especially with its air ride suspension and more plastic cladding that to put any modern day crossover to shame, it definitely had its fair share of problems. Although a very popular vehicle with Audi enthusiasts and station wagon lovers alike, unfortunately, Audi discontinued the vehicle here in North America in 2005, leaving the next generation of A6, which is the C6 generation, to carry onwards in European countries and other places around the world. Meanwhile, we only had the one Allroad, one generation that is, and well, it left a void in the market. It definitely let other competitors gain and pick up speed, especially when it came to crossovers in larger SUVs, which Audi kind of fell behind on. And therefore, they would have to really step up their game. And what they decided to do to win over consumers again was creating the Q7 and then later on the Q5, which again are great vehicles. But what about us station wagon lovers? We love a good station wagon. So therefore, in 2013, Audi decided, you know what, we will bring back something that everyone kind of missed. And that is, of course, this vehicle here, the A4 Allroad. Now, this being an A4 Allroad, hopefully it won't deter you because of the bad hype that the old A6 Allroad got here in North America. So this vehicle is, of course, completely different. It's based on the B8 or B8.5 platform of the A4, which came out in 2009 here in North America and ran to about 2016. So this vehicle came out during the refresh versus the B8.5, which was in 2013, and meaning that in 2013 you got the new front end, so the new headlights, which I quite like on the refresh, which is this nice LED strip right here. And then, of course, this being an all-road, you do get the plastic cladding. Now, like any other vehicle, I'm not usually a fan of this stuff. I mean, it doesn't look terrible on this vehicle, but I personally would rather have it paint matched, which was something you could option when you bought this brand new from the factory. So I would probably do that. But nonetheless, so I do think the rest of the front end flows pretty well. You do have this nice grille, which although I'm not usually a fan of chrome, I will say actually looks very well on this vehicle. And then down below here, you do have this sort of aluminum piece right here, and that is quite nice. It kind of gives it a more aggressive presence and meaning that it means business. From the side profile, the Avant / Allroad looks very well, I think, especially with this nice crease from the front end all the way to the back tail light. And then not to mention you do have a little bit of a crease down here, which is very simple, but I like it very much. And not to mention that these are the nice 19-inch alloy wheels that came with the sport package that this vehicle is equipped with. And then of course you have the cladding here, which is typical all through the wheel arches and down through the back. But the one thing I think is really nice that they added here was this nice aluminum strip there to kind of separate and break it up a little bit. And then on the side view mirror here, you do have your turning indicator built in. And then you do have the auto dimming glass, and also not to mention that these are power folding mirrors, which is quite lovely. Now that we're at the back end of the vehicle, I have to admit it's probably my least favorite part of this vehicle, at least in terms of styling. It's very bland, and I don't feel like it really fits in with the rest of what's going on in this car. But you do have a nice spoiler here at the top, which I do quite like. And then you do have a nice long wiper arm, which extends about the full length of the glass, which is kind of hard to find on new cars nowadays. And then below that, you do have your backup camera and your button for the power lift gate. And then over on the side here, you do have your fully functioning LED taillight, which has a built-in rear fog lamp. And then I think this is the part where I don't like, is that the fact that underneath all this is that big piece of plastic cladding. And yes, you do have your backup sensors, which is quite lovely. And then you do have this nice aluminum undercarriage and dual exhaust. But otherwise, that's pretty much it. Under the hood here, we have Audi's second generation 4-cylinder, 2-liter turbocharged TFSI engine that makes about 220 horsepower and about 258 foot-pounds of torque. Now, this second generation, just like the first one, has its problems, but this one's definitely a step in the right direction. Now, some of us will recall that, at least in the B8 platform, so basically this sort of same generation engine, that there was a lot of problems due to oil consumption and bad piston rings and timing issues, because this second generation is no longer on a timing belt like the first. It's actually on a timing chain. So the timing chain is actually located here at the front of the engine, which is quite easy, better than some other Audis like the 3.2, which is actually at the back of the engine. Don't ask me how I know that. But yes, this one is a lot more serviceable, and I say serviceable because it is technically a serviceable item that should be serviced every now and again. Other than that, there's not a lot of other common problems. You'll just have the regular maintenance issues. Carbon cleaning is still something I'd recommend with an engine like this. Speaking from experience, having done quite a bit of work on these kind of cars. Although this engine's not perfect, I will say if you're going to buy a vehicle like this, like the Allroad or even the A4 of this generation, that you stick with the 2013 Plus, of course, because there's less problems. No surprise, the interior of an Audi, especially one like this, is quite nice. I mean, they've always done a really good job with their interiors in terms of fit and finish. I mean, there's never really any complaints from, I'm sure, most consumers. You know, you always have your soft touch materials here on the dash, even down here by your knees, and even on the doors. But not to mention the leather itself too. I mean, these are the nice sports seats, which have the nice thigh extensions and bolsters on the side. They're really comfortable and hug you well too. I mean, I can't really fault the quality of the material all that much. I mean, in terms of what you got in this vehicle, it's pretty well equipped. Now, this is the sport package, so you do get a couple extra things. As I was mentioning just a second ago, was the sport seats, which have that thigh extension. And then also you have this flat bottom steering wheel, which I love this steering wheel. You do have a really nice setup here. You have your paddle shifters here on the back, and it feels nice and thick in the hands, which is good. And then not to mention you do have this black headliner. Now, if you do move down the center console here, it's quite lovely. I mean, it's very unique. Audi's always kind of done this with their vehicles, and they do give you two cup holders because, you know, heaven forbid they only give you one. But one is smaller than the other, and by smaller, I mean it's almost kind of pointless, but you might be able to fit like a really slender bottle there. With the armrest itself, it does slide forward, rendering that other cup holder useless, which is fine. And then you have this sort of ratcheting system, which is like on a lot of their other Audis, which is kind of lovely too. I do like that. But one gripe that I've had, and especially have driven this vehicle now for a long time, is where I can't seem to find that sort of sweet spot of resting my arm on the armrest, at least my elbow, and also just getting into that sort of comfort with the steering wheel and everything else. Now, I'm 5'11", so I'm not a giant, but I just can't seem to figure that one out. That's just maybe a me thing. But you do, underneath here, you have a little bit of a storage cubby here with your 12-volt outlet, which is quite nice. And then you move sort of towards the front here, and you do have Audi's infamous MMI system, which is nice. They have, you know, progressed it and made it better, just like BMW's iDrive over the years, which is nice. You do get your sort of your main controls here. You have your navigation, telephone, and your car and other media things, which this vehicle does have Bluetooth music, because the pre-facelift version, the B8, didn't have that apparently, so that is a nice addition here in this refresh model. Speaking of the media system though, I do have a bit of a gripe here, and that is the fact that if you want to play your music via Bluetooth and you want to change it to the song, the next one or the previous one, you can't do it, at least via the steering wheel. You have to do it this little rotary knob down here over to the right. Now, is that the end of the world? No, it's not, but it's just really annoying, and it's very much an oversight on Audi's part, I think. I hope they fix that in the current generations, which I'm sure they have. But other than that, it's pretty much good. The sound system in this vehicle, although not the optional Bang & Olufsen sound system, is still pretty good too. I don't really have any gripes with just the regular sound system. Now, you move up sort of the center here, you do have your shifter here, which is quite nice with this little boot along with it. One thing that's kind of weird, though, is this little slot, and I think it's kind of for maybe like cards or something like that, but it's just like a little slot there off to the side. And then, of course, it wouldn't be a German car if it didn't have one of these, and that is your cigarette lighter. and ashtray. You do have your push button start right here, which is quite nice. That's one of the ways you can turn on this car. The other way is by using the fob here and using this little insert, which is right about there. In terms of some other features, of course, you have your auto-dimming rearview mirror and auto-dimming side view mirrors, which is quite lovely, as I mentioned earlier. And then you have your sunglass holder, and then you have a panoramic glass roof in this vehicle, which is quite lovely. I mean, it extends all the way into the rear seating area, which I quite like. Makes the cabin feel a little bit more roomy, especially when you have the sunshade open. And, you know, it really goes nicely with kind of contrasting all this sort of dark interior, so I think it's a lovely thing. And then of course you have your garage home link, which allows you to program your gates or garage doors. And that is pretty much here for the front end. Let's hop in the rear seating area and check that out. Now that I'm in the rear seating area, it's really comfortable, just as comfortable as the front actually. And surprise, surprise, there's loads of space back here. I mean, there's not acres of leg space, but it's pretty generous, I would say, for kind of a smaller station wagon. And that I do have quite a bit of space here for my knees between the back seat here. Now this seat, of course, is set to my driving height, which was 5'11", but you do have quite a bit of generous space back there, even for my feet to move around too. I can actually move them up and down, which is quite lovely. And then not to mention that these seats, I mean, although they really aren't sport seats back here, they do kind of hold you in a little bit more better than some other cars I find. And then also the height here for my head, I mean, I've got loads of space. I don't feel cramped or claustrophobic sitting back here. And the nice thing about that too, also not feeling claustrophobic back here, is the fact that you have that panoramic roof which continues to the back end and which allows a lot of light to come in as well. But speaking of features though and all that stuff, you don't really get a whole lot back here. I mean, yes, you do have a nice set of vents there with your own controls to get hot or cold. And then you also do have a power outlet below that, it's just a 12 volts. And then over on the passenger doors here, on the rear doors, of course, soft touch material. It's an Audi, of course. And you do have a nice slot here to fit like a water bottle. And then, of course, your 2 speakers. Now, over here in the center, yes, you do get a center armrest, which is kind of rigid, actually. I mean, it's probably never been used, but yes, you do have sort of a storage cubby in here, which is nice. It's kind of got like a felted sort of carpeted material in there, so things don't rattle around. And then, of course, you do have your cup holders. And not to mention, above here, you do have your 2 dome lights, which do have their own controls. You can turn on either side, which is quite lovely. In the rear cargo area, it's no surprise there's loads of space back here. After all, this is a station wagon, and therefore it should fit everything, including the family dog. Now, if you fold the rear seats down, you'll even have more space than you know what to do with. There's a couple cool, nice things about the rear cargo area, and that is this tonneau cover, which is retractable and kind of cool. It has this little notch on the side, these little rails that allow it to go up like that. And then also, if you're pulling it down, locks into place, which makes it a bit more convenient rather than having to reach further into the back end here. And then underneath the floor here, you do have your spare tire, which is not a full-size spare, but is kind of like a donut / deflated donut tire. I don't know what it is. And then under that, you do have the 12-volt battery for the car. And then on the left side, there's just nothing there. It's just kind of a, I wouldn't even say storage compartment, but an empty housing compartment there. And then on the right side here, you do have a little storage cubby there, which has netting and a 12-volt power outlet, and not to mention 2 lights on either side, and then also a light here on the tailgate too. And with all that being said, I think we should get this vehicle out on the road and see how well it performs. Now that I'm out on the road, I'm going to jump into the immediate topic of handling. And of no surprise, a vehicle like this handles pretty well. And Audis are typically known for having a little bit of understeer and being a little bit nose heavy, especially in previous generations of the A4. And this one here, I feel, is pretty well balanced overall. I feel like they've probably managed to move the engine back off the front axle and closer to the cabin here, which makes it a little bit better proportioned and well balanced. On that note of handling, I want to deep dive into the topic of steering in this vehicle. Now, this vehicle is equipped with the power electronic assisted steering, meaning that it's no longer hydraulically powered like the previous generation A4s, and it's, you know, it's not bad. I mean, it's nice. It's probably better for maintenance, but it doesn't really give you a lot of feedback sometimes. I mean, this vehicle is equipped with the Drive Select, meaning that you can, you know, change some sport, comfort, and whatever you want individual, which is great, you know. I mean, especially if this was an S4, but in this vehicle in particular, I find even though I have the settings to dynamic, which is sport for Audi terms, it doesn't really make a difference. It doesn't feel any stiffer and doesn't feel any heavier, which is kind of unfortunate because I know a lot of people want a comfortable cruiser, which this definitely is, but when you're going through a back twisty road like I'm on now, I want something a little bit more engaging, and even on the highway too, I want to feel a little bit heavier so that way the vehicle feels a little bit more situated at high speeds. Now, I'm not going to fault it too much. It's not horrible. It's definitely better than a lot of other manufacturers, which completely isolate you from the steering, totally. But it could be definitely something that they could improve upon, and I'm sure they have addressed that issue in newer generations of the A4 Allroad and a lot of their other cars. But nonetheless, though, I think it's worth mentioning. Despite the fact that this is an all-wheel drive vehicle, it does really well. I'm actually pleasantly surprised. Yes, this vehicle does require premium fuel here, which is 91 octane here in North America. It's not all that bad. It really does pretty well for a 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. Now, you do get about 11.2 liters per 100 kilometers in the city and 8.4 liters per 100 kilometers on the highway. And for those of you still using the Imperial system, that is 21 miles per gallon in the city and 28 miles per gallon on the highway. And that's really good, actually. As I was just saying, that's fantastic. You know, a lot of vehicles with all-wheel drive, they get crippled by the fuel economy. And as I said, you know, yes, premium fuel is a thing, but if you were to live in Europe or something like that, you could probably get away with a lower octane, something a bit cheaper. But here, it is recommended to use that octane. Now that I'm out on the highway cruising the local Autobahn, this vehicle does really well. I mean, no surprise, Audi and many other German car manufacturers design their vehicles to handle very well on the highways at fast speeds because, of course, the Autobahn. And this is no exception to that rule. This vehicle is very comfortable and very quiet on the inside here. I can actually hear myself think for a moment. It is pretty good overall. I don't really have any complaints here. Yes, the steering is still a little bit too light for me. I do like a bit of a heavier steering wheel, especially on a highway when you don't want to feel too loosey-goosey. But otherwise, I can't really fault it for too much else. So, what do I think about the Allroad? Well, I think it's a very unique vehicle and that you won't really find too much direct competitors out there on the road, unless you're considering, of course, a crossover or a Subaru. Then maybe you have something. But otherwise, this is very uniquely Audi. And I quite like it for that reason, is that you can't really directly compare it to anything. So I think it's a good vehicle. Of course, it does have its flaws, being a German luxury car. Of course, there's no exemption to that, of course. But I think the overall styling, the handling, and not to mention the fact that it's got the all-wheel drive quattro system, it's pretty good. And not to mention, if you are looking for something like this out on the road, you can find one for under $20,000 Canadian. And of course, make sure you do your research. And I don't just mean on the vehicle, but actual maintenance records, see if it's been crash damage, anything like that. Of course, with buying any vehicle out there now. But this vehicle in particular, it can be a good vehicle to you if you look after it. And of course, if you can turn a wrench, you can definitely save some money there. But regardless, I feel like this vehicle overall is probably one of their better vehicles. And I do think it lives up to the all-road name. Despite the fact that it's still not an off-road vehicle, I think it handles pretty well for something light off-roading. And on that note, I want to take a moment to say thank you very much for watching today's video. If you did enjoy it, please be sure to hit the thumbs up button and also consider subscribing so that way you don't miss any future reviews like this and also DIYs and car projects on my channel. And until next time, take care. Bye now.